People who've run into their crazy ex years later, what were they like? Right out of high school, I started dating a girl from our friend group. She had a talent for self-destruction. She quit a well-paying job, one that earned at least twice as much as any of her friends' jobs, just to take a vacation she hadn't earned yet. She maxed out a credit card to pay for surgery on her ancient dog, even after the vet called it a Hail Mary chance at survival. A month later, she had to put the dog down. When her grandmother passed away, she inherited a brand new luxury car and promptly took out a loan on it to give her mother money. Her mother never paid her back, claiming she didn't owe her anything because she had raised her. Eventually, the car was repossessed, and she was left driving an old Chevette that barely ran, which caused her to miss work constantly. She was also a nightmare at restaurants. More than once, she accidentally dropped her plate on the floor when she didn't like the food, and through it all, she never stopped complaining about her life. She'd talk over everyone, endlessly describing how hard things were. I spent half that relationship just sitting there, watching her cry about how unfair everything was. We broke up because she wanted to be intimate with other people. I had already been looking for a way out, so honestly, I was relieved. She went off to college out of state, and I stayed local, enrolling in community college. About a year later, she reached out to one of my friends on ICQ. Yeah, that's how long ago this was. He and I were playing a LAN game when he said, "Hey, she just messaged me. She's asking about you because she forgot your number. What do you want me to tell her?" Without missing a beat, I said, "Tell her I passed away in a tragic car accident." Then I called my parents to give them a heads up because I knew my dad would absolutely play along. Was it kind of crappy of me? Yeah, probably. But in my defense, I figured she'd stay in college and forget about me. I had no idea she'd blown through all her scholarship money and student loans in record time. What should have lasted 4 years somehow vanished in less than one. I didn't know she'd stopped going to class halfway through a semester, spending her days either curled up in bed crying or tormenting her roommate. I also didn't know she'd moved back in with her mother, who, by all accounts, had used a good chunk of that money to refurbish their house with rental furniture, plasma TVs, and a 55-gallon aquarium that eventually turned black with algae. For a few months, I managed to avoid her, which was no small feat in a small town. That ended one afternoon when I was sitting in a bookstore cafe and she walked in. Her face went white as a ghost. She turned around and walked straight out. About 15 minutes later, she came back, marched right up to me, and said, "I knew you weren't dead." She immediately started word vomiting every single woe she'd endured in college, how she'd been unfairly put on academic suspension, how her roommate was unbearable because she wouldn't listen, how her mother had stolen all her money, and how she'd managed to total 2 brand new cars and had to replace them both. She didn't pick up on the fact that I wasn't interested. When I stood up to leave, she followed me all the way to my car, relentlessly. Once there, she tried to kiss me while holding me. I pushed her away firmly and gave a sharp no. That set off an immediate torrent of tears. I got in my car and drove off, while she sat in an empty parking spot weeping uncontrollably. I managed to avoid her for the most part in the years that followed. I was one of the first people I knew to have a cell phone, which I needed for my security job. Somehow, she got hold of the number and started calling me nightly while I was on shift. I answered once, made small talk for a few minutes, and then came up with an excuse to hang up. Not long after, she showed up at my parents' house. Luckily, I'd already moved out and they refused to tell her where I lived. It finally took me leaving the country and being completely unreachable for a few months for her to break the habit of trying to contact me. Only then did I get some semblance of peace. Story 2. My ex moved in with me, and I believed he was a qualified scaffolder with a job waiting for him in my town. That turned out to be untrue. He wasn't qualified at all. For the next 8 months, he lived off my income, and when he eventually found work at a warehouse, he would spend his pay within days and end up with nothing. Before long, he stopped working completely and spent most of his time watching TV and movies while using substances. As time went on, I grew increasingly frustrated, especially when I discovered he had been using my tablet to sign up for dating sites behind my back. The dishonesty was constant. He lied about everything, even small things like what he had for breakfast. It became completely exhausting. Still trying to be kind, I found out that one of his friends back in his hometown owned a company and was willing to take him on. His friend even offered to help him get the proper qualifications through college. A genuinely great opportunity. I hoped that once he got settled, I could finally step back and move on with my own life. But that didn't happen. Not long after, I was bombarded with calls from him, crying, apologizing, and begging me to take him back. When he found out I had started seeing someone new, he walked out in the middle of his job, leaving his friend to deal with upset clients and unfinished work. Then, things took a more serious turn. He told me he was being admitted for mental health treatment, which really worried me because I've faced my own struggles in that area. But when my sister looked into it, she discovered that the place he mentioned had actually been closed for years. Eventually, I stopped hearing from him, until a few years later, when he suddenly reached out, demanding to see his son. By that point, I was in a new relationship and had a child with my current partner. It had been more than 2 years since I'd seen my ex, but he was convinced my son was his, insisting that he knew how long pregnancy lasts. Keep in mind, he already had a child from a previous relationship, so you'd think he would understand the timeline. When I asked, "So you thought you had another child out there and only decided to reach out now?" He didn't have much to say, other than pointing out that my son has blue eyes like him. Well, so do I. Later on, I heard that he was homeless and living in a storage area of an apartment building. Then, just a week later, someone told me he supposedly had his own business and was moving abroad. And apparently I'd missed out on a catch. Not long after, I saw he'd gone on a trip to Ibiza for a week. It clearly wasn't a business venture, and I had no idea how he afforded it, especially since his own friends mentioned he wasn't working. But honestly, I didn't care anymore. Over the years, I've still heard bits and pieces, even though I always say I'd rather not know. It's been nearly a decade now. I was told he had another child, that the relationship didn't work out, and that he's still struggling with the same habits and lifestyle. He even tried to pull me into new drama by adding me on social media, and so did his new partner. One moment she claimed he was doing incredibly well, and the next she was asking me to send him money because he hadn't eaten in weeks. In some ways, I guess it's not the wildest story out there, but I do genuinely pity him. Still, he's definitely the kind of ex I know I'd never have been with if my self-esteem had been stronger back then. I was at a really low point when we met, and looking back, I can see how much I settled for less than I deserved. What's sad is that he's now only a few years away from 40, and since I first knew him in his mid-20s, he hasn't changed at all. The same patterns, the same choices. At one point, he even went through my parents' wills when they had them updated, trying to see what I was getting. I took them right back and told him, "You're not entitled to anything. Even I'm not, and I'm their daughter." Story 3. She eventually turned out to be in a bad state mentally, which, looking back, wasn't entirely surprising, but it truly was a wild and exhausting journey. S and I dated for most of college. After graduation, she went to medical school while I started graduate school a few hours away. Barely 2 weeks in, she told me she wanted to take a break, which I later realized was her polite way of saying she wanted to be with another guy she'd met in med school. At the time, I tried to act mature about it and thought, maybe this could work out for me too. Spoiler, it didn't. My dating life stayed pretty quiet, though I occasionally saw S when I visited her town. Eventually, though, I met the woman who would become my wife while still in grad school. We moved about 5 states away, got engaged, and were living a calm, happy life. About a year and a half after we moved, I received a message from S saying she had accepted a job in our city. She'd graduated from a reputable medical school, and the position was highly competitive, so I congratulated her. During her first year in town, we saw her a few times. She came to our house for dinner, and we visited hers, but her apartment was always in complete disarray. She rarely left except for work and seemed to have become reclusive, maybe even agoraphobic. Over time, contact faded, despite our efforts to include her and invite her out. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message from her asking if we wanted any of her belongings because she was leaving real soon and couldn't take them with her. It immediately sounded alarming, so I reached out to her mother and sister, whom I was still in touch with. That's when I learned the shocking truth. She had started dating a dealer who mistreated her and manipulated her into stealing medication from the hospital. When she failed a drug test, one that showed traces of multiple substances, she lost her job. On top of that, her parents had been scammed out of tens of thousands of dollars by her and her boyfriend. When I learned all this, I reached out to see if she needed help, since her talk about leaving town was really her attempt to escape him. She asked if we could watch her dogs for a day while she packed, We agreed, thinking it would be simple enough, but she dropped them off and then went completely out of contact for more than 2 days. The dogs were not house-trained, constantly fought with our own dog, and reeked so badly it was almost unbearable. Eventually, my wife had to message her, warning that we would take them to a shelter if she didn't come back to get them. That finally got her to show up. When she arrived, S was extremely paranoid, insisting she was being followed and that her boyfriend could be nearby. It was unsettling to witness. After she took the dogs, my wife and I quietly agreed to distance ourselves and put the entire incident behind us. A couple of months later, her mother called with troubling news. Essie had accepted a job in another state that came with a $30,000 advance. Instead of using it to start fresh, she vanished to the southeast with the same boyfriend. He spent most of the money on drugs, stole what remained, and eventually disappeared after leaving her badly injured. She later returned to our city because of unresolved legal issues. The boyfriend was gone for good by then, and she began drifting in and out of halfway houses. Every so often, she would message me saying she needed a ride because she was being followed. I stopped responding directly, forwarding her messages to her parents instead. They handled it from there. Shortly before we moved back closer to home, I heard from her mother again and even got a message from S after she saw that our house was up for sale. She said she was finally taking her medication regularly, had completed a rehabilitation program, and was working in a medical-related field once more. As part of her legal agreement, she was gradually paying back nearly $100,000 she had scammed from various people. I'm genuinely glad she seems to be getting better, but I can't help feeling that I truly dodged a major bullet when she decided to fool around during medical school. My wife and I, on the other hand, recently welcomed our first child, live near our families, and are both doing well in our careers. Sometimes, what feels like heartbreak in the moment is really life's way of saving you from something far worse. Story 4. I've had 2 that come to mind. She was a dream girl, a hot goth girl studying cosmetology. I was living with some roommates, starting my freelance career, and living comfortably off a hefty savings account I'd built after spending months in the desert of an antique land. She was quirky and spontaneous, the kind of person who'd make weird noises in public, perform impromptu interpretive dances with wildlife, or take a swim in a mall fountain just for fun. She was close to her family, though her father was a hard-working man who clearly looked down on me. He didn't like that I was enjoying life instead of grinding away at a 9-to-5 job. After a heated argument one night, I was never invited back to their place, and he kept pressuring her to drop me. Her stepfather was another story. Kind of a creep. He often took her out for father-daughter dinners, but he was closer to her age than to her mother's. To top it off, he was the lead singer of a garage band. Then she disappeared for about 2 weeks, saying she was spending time with family. In reality, she was shacking up with the bass player from her stepfather's garage band. Her real father actually approved of the guy because when he wasn't playing bass, he pushed a lawnmower for a living. I moved on quickly. I was still enjoying life, living off my savings, building my freelance career, and for once, not spending money on someone else. About 6 months later, she tried reaching out, but I ignored it. A year after that, she messaged me again, and this time, I didn't leave her on read. She asked if I wanted to meet up, and since I was free that night, I agreed. We met at a Denny's, where she laid it all out. Apparently, I had been the best thing that ever happened to her. She reminded me how every day after class, I'd rub her feet because she'd been standing for hours. She brought up how our intimate life had been constant and fun, and how we'd done so many creative things together. Experimenting with monster prosthetics, painting late into the night, designing costumes, and more. The guy she had left me for didn't do any of that. He refused to give her massages, saying it cramped his hands. Playing the bass was about as far as his creativity went. Most of the time he was smoking, and when they were intimate, he'd stop after a few minutes, complain about back pain, and make her do all the work if they continued. He could barely afford rent, so she ended up borrowing money from her parents just to keep a roof over their heads. I listened to her entire story, realizing she was hinting that she wanted to get back together. When we finished, I paid the check. We hugged and went our separate ways. The next day, she sent me an angry text, ranting about how I had wasted her time back when we were together. 6 months later, she reached out again. I was hungry, so we went to the same Denny's. By then, she had left the bass player for another member of her stepfather's band. This new guy wasn't physically abusive, but he yelled constantly. In contrast, our relationship had only ended with one small argument. Over dinner, I told her how much I was enjoying single life and how well freelancing was going. When we were done, I paid the check, we hugged, and went our separate ways. The next day, I got another angry text. This time, she hinted she was upset that I hadn't suggested getting back together. But she had made her own bed. Almost a year later, the pattern repeated. She had started seeing a doctor whose money allowed her to quit working. She began exercising, got in shape, and described herself as a trophy wife in training. But the relationship wasn't what she'd imagined. He was never home, and when he was too tired to give her attention. Once again, I paid the check, we hugged, and went our separate ways. And once again, a text followed. Angry, indirect, but unmistakable. She never said it outright, yet it was always the same story. She had made her bed. This cycle has repeated at least once a year. I've heard her complain about all kinds of people she's dated. A woman with fake chesticles who refused any intimacy. A model boyfriend who encouraged binging and purging and would break things during arguments. A car salesman who made good money but threatened to end his life over minor setbacks, and more. Meanwhile, I've moved on. I've had relationships, built a successful freelance career, and regularly take month-long vacations. She's still working retail. Her old bass player boyfriend had kept her from finishing cosmetology school. I'm expecting her to contact me soon. It's about that time. Story 5. After college, I moved to Thailand and lived there for a few years. During that time, I met a girl and we started dating. We had amazing chemistry. Her last name sounded ridiculously Italian because her father, whom she had never met, was supposedly Italian. Her mother, from what I gathered, was half Thai and half Filipino, though she didn't really know her either. She lived with her grandparents who had money, so things were comfortable for her. She was this cute, lively girl studying at a university, 19 years old while I was 22. It was great at first, but also incredibly dramatic. Eventually, she cheated on me with my so-called friend who lived in the apartment directly below mine. It broke my 22-year-old heart. We broke up, lost contact, and not long after, I moved back to the States. 9 years later, I decided to return to Thailand. On my very first day there, a familiar name appeared in my messages, JM. We started chatting, and it was great, just like old times. We laughed, reminisced, and caught up on life. She looked a bit different in the photos she'd posted. She had a couple of kids now and had gained a little weight, which was perfectly understandable. It had been 9 years after all. She said she'd reached out because she had never properly apologized for cheating on me back then. Apology accepted. As it turned out, we were both in Bangkok, so we agreed to meet. What luck. I didn't know anyone in the city anymore, and now I had someone familiar to spend time with. Plus, I couldn't help but wonder if there was a chance we might reconnect more intimately, since we were both single. The next day, I met her at a mall. She had told me exactly where she was, but I still didn't recognize her until we made eye contact. She had gained about 60 to 80 pounds. But hey, 2 kids, right? That happens. What struck me more, though, was that her skin was noticeably darker. In Thailand, light skin is often considered the beauty standard because of classism and colorism, and many people go to great lengths to whiten their skin. I didn't remember her ever doing that, but even if she had and later stopped, the change was dramatic. Her hair, too, was completely different, now incredibly curly when it had once been straight or just slightly wavy. Naturally, I was curious, and she told me the story. Apparently, the guy she dated after me, a Norwegian tourist, had gotten her pregnant. She hadn't realized she'd missed 2 or 3 periods until her body started showing. When she finally told him, he suggested to terminate it, but it was already too late. Not long after, she developed serious health complications, and a friend eventually convinced her to go to the hospital. Her blood pressure was dangerously high, and she was on the verge of kidney failure. The doctors had to induce labor to deliver the baby, and she ended up on life support. Her brother, someone she barely knew because he was older and had been raised by her mother, turned out to be a match and donated a kidney to her. She even showed me the scar. Thankfully, she recovered, and her baby was healthy. but she said that experience had changed her completely. When I knew her before, she was constantly in the hospital for hypertension. Then she reminded me of a detail I had completely forgotten. She refused to drink water because she didn't like the taste. She would only drink soda or anything else but water. I used to try to convince her to take an occasional sip, but she was never into it. I guess I hadn't realized she truly meant it. She never drank water. After the transplant, once she started following the doctor's instructions, especially drinking water, her health improved dramatically, and so did her complexion. The change was so striking that her family finally had to tell her the truth. Her father wasn't Italian at all. He was Ecuadorian. He had returned to Ecuador when her mother was pregnant, and the family decided to tell everyone he was Italian because of racism. Italy is in Europe after all, and Italians can sometimes have darker skin, barely close enough to make the story believable. Her last name, it turned out, was completely made up. I don't remember exactly what she said about her hair, but I don't think she ever straightened it before. Anyway, she dropped out of school and had the baby. The Norwegian guy actually stuck around for a while. They tried to make it work, but it didn't. He didn't go home, though. Instead, he joined some kind of motorcycle cosplay gang and vanished with his bike. Then she met a guy from Finland, a tourist. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice. Well, you can't get fooled again. He got her pregnant too, but this time, he went back to Finland. She had her second child, who, thankfully, was healthy. She started working with her grandfather, who she openly admitted was a loan shark. Then came the Danish guy. Somehow, he didn't get her pregnant, but he lived with her. He refused to get a job, preferring to smoke weed all day and hang out with her kids while she supported him. She told me that his friends had come from Daneland, as she called it, and that he'd gone to visit them in Phuket. Obviously, she couldn't go with him. She had to work and take care of the kids. From what she told me, they partied there for about a month, and she sent him over $100 every day. That's a lot of money in Thailand, and when she mentioned it, the conclusion seemed pretty clear. He was probably spending it on S-workers, though she didn't seem to realize it. Eventually, he came back and went right back to his old routine. No job, smoking all day, and doing nothing productive. Then, out of nowhere, he had a breakdown. He cried, said he missed his family and left for Daneland. That had happened just a couple of weeks before we met at the mall. One final detail. She asked if I remembered her ex from when we were dating. I said I did. She used to talk about him all the time. He was a 6'7" basketball player. I told her I wasn't exactly eager to hear more about him and suggested she reminisce elsewhere. She paused for a moment and said, "Yeah, so he offed himself." Well, all right. He'd been 25 when he started dating her. She was 17 at the time, and he'd been her English teacher. Real class act. So, that's that. Pretty sad and kind of insane. I couldn't help thinking, wow, she seems to exclusively date really messed up people. Story 6. It has been almost 40 years since my divorce from a manipulative, controlling, and moody husband. The first 10 years after the divorce were a nightmare, as he turned every interaction into a battlefield. He constantly criticized me in front of our daughters and, without my knowledge, made their visits with him an emotional struggle. A few years later, he moved to another state. Over time, he seemed to be getting help through AA, appearing more emotionally stable. What surprised all of us was that he had never been much of a drinker when we were together, so his involvement with AA was confusing. When he eventually reached out to make amends, he confessed that he had been diagnosed as bipolar, but refused to take medication. After he made amends with our daughters, they finally told me about the emotional mistreatment they had suffered years earlier during their visits with him. They admitted they had been too afraid to speak up at the time, fearing things would only get worse. Learning this so many years later was devastating. For a while, things seemed to improve. We even managed to have some pleasant family-style gatherings during the holidays. Still, there were moments when his passive-aggressive behavior resurfaced, especially toward our older daughter. Despite that, we maintained a fragile peace for nearly 20 years as he moved closer to be near them. For a time, I truly believed things are fine with the ex. Before the pandemic, however, he had already begun to drift away from his family. Years of strained relationships had left him isolated, but when the pandemic struck, that loneliness deepened into something darker. My daughters, despite everything he had put them through, began to worry about him. Out of compassion, they reached out. encouraging him to move closer, offering to help him find a home, hoping that maybe a change of scenery could start to heal old wounds. For a brief moment, it seemed like the beginning of a fragile reconciliation. But as he began searching for a place, his old patterns resurfaced almost immediately. He started picking unnecessary fights, creating emotional flare-ups, and even arguing with potential landlords during interviews. What made it worse was how he bragged about those confrontations, almost proud of his behavior. He couldn't see how unreasonable and counterproductive he sounded, or how his actions reflected poorly on those who had spoken for him. My daughters and I were left speechless, unable to comprehend how someone could sabotage their own chances so easily. Then, just a few days before Father's Day, a celebration my daughters had lovingly planned to include him in, he sent a cold, emotionless group text. "I don't think I'll be coming on Father's Day or moving or visiting your area in the future." His words landed like a punch to the gut. Confused and concerned, we asked him to explain. His reply came soon after. "I can't celebrate Father's Day. It embarrasses me because I was a bad father. I won't be seeing any of you again because I can't handle the guilt." One of my daughters, deeply worried about his mental state, began a private and careful conversation with him. She tried to reach whatever part of him still cared, gently suggesting that confronting his guilt and rebuilding connections might be the healthier path forward. But nothing changed. When she softly asked if he would consider therapy or counseling, his reply was hollow. "I can't make any promises." Not long after, he sent a fake, identical apology to each of us, the kind of perfunctory "I'm sorry" a child gives when told to apologize. That was the last we ever heard from him. It has now been more than 2 years. Later, through bits and pieces from the grapevine, we learned that he had moved even farther away, once again retreating from everyone who cared. Needless to say, my daughters had to begin yet another painful healing process. They finally accepted in their hearts that he was a toxic presence in their lives and decided there would be no future contact with him. The daughter he had once mistreated came to that conclusion right away, while the other took several months to work through deep fear, guilt, and anxiety before she found her peace. In the end, no lasting change ever came from him. Through it all, I was reminded of the very reasons I had divorced him in the first place. Looking back, I realized with sadness that out of guilt and fear, I had shown him far more fairness than he ever deserved when I agreed to joint custody and visitation rights. My daughters carried the weight of that mistake, and they were the ones who suffered the consequences. Story 7. Her fiancé, let's call him Hank, an old friend of mine, showed up at my house unannounced. He said that he and Simone had been together for a while and had recently been talking about me, so he thought he'd look me up and see if I wanted to hang out or catch a movie. We met a few days later, and the whole situation turned out to be a nested matryoshka of lies, one inside another. For years, I had been receiving strange emails under false names, some pretending to ask if I was a particular person working at a certain place, others drunkenly ranting about how I supposedly owed them money. Hank eventually confessed that Simone had orchestrated all of it. Every single email. She had even put him up to writing some of them himself. At the movie, she suddenly contrived an emergency and called Hank right there in the theater. He stepped out to take the call, and when he came back, he said he had to leave. Apparently, her middle daughter's date was making a scene in the neighborhood, and everyone was frightened. I decided to tag along to see what all the fuss was about. On the way to his car, she called again, this time accusing him of never loving her. He immediately launched into frantic whispering, "No, I do love you. I do." From that alone, I could tell this was her go-to tactic, a way to keep him emotionally off balance. When we arrived at the house, there was no disturbance at all. The date had left, the daughter was fine, and Simone came out all smiles, saying she wanted to hug me for being willing to play white knight for an ex's child. I declined. About a week later, Hank reached out again. His daughter Mary needed help with a math, or she'd flunk out of the local community college. I suspected it might be part of a long con, but I figured, what the heck? It turned out she really was struggling. We met a few times in one of the library's tutoring rooms, going over the basics of algebra, plotting points, rise over run, the whole thing. It seemed to help. On our last day, I brought her a small gift, a poster of a popular fictional character she liked. I told her she'd do great and wished her well. If that sounds odd, I suppose it was. But nothing inappropriate happened, not in thought or in action. As predicted, there was a reveal at the end of the final tutoring session. In the library parking garage, Hank, Simone, and Simone's son had been sitting in the car watching videos, which drained the battery. I told them, good luck with that, and made a quick exit while Hank went off in search of jumper cables and, hopefully, a substitute hero. Not long after, Simone began messaging me on Facebook with a barrage of ridiculous accusations. She claimed I was the reason she'd ended up destitute and saddled with multiple children from absent fathers, because I had disappeared. She said she had thought I was dead for years until she Googled my name and discovered I was alive and had a family. For the record, I did not ghost her. We had formally broken up. Things escalated quickly after that. An onslaught of DMs, friend requests, and emails from her, Hank, and various family members. I went scorched earth, blocked every account, set up bounce replies for their email addresses, and created filters to send anything from them straight to the trash. The kicker in all of this? Hank was a coward. There's no universe in which she'll ever actually marry him. Bonus. Before they moved in together, Hank's house mysteriously burned down. I made it very clear, before cutting contact for good, that he was never to show up on my property unannounced again. That was about 10 years ago. Since then, they've finally stopped trying to drag me back into their crazed little vortex. Story 8. When I was about 15, I fell completely head over heels for a girl who would later become my first girlfriend. She had been a truly wonderful friend, but as a girlfriend, she was far from perfect. Even then, I could tell her home life was difficult. I think she imagined I would be some kind of shining knight who could rescue her from her problems, and when I couldn't live up to that fantasy, she left me. She broke up with me after about 6 months and immediately started seeing a guy I had considered a friend. I was fairly well liked in high school, so this gave her a bad reputation. After she broke up with him and a couple of years had passed, she apologized. I saw her casually on and off during my freshman year of college, till we eventually drifted apart. Fast forward to the COVID pandemic. Toward the end of the first year, she started reaching out to me on Instagram. She kept saying how much she missed me and how, once things returned to normal, we should meet up. She was taking a kind of my name is Earl approach because she was in therapy, and her therapist had suggested it. After a couple of months of talking online, even though she lived in a different country, we finally arranged to meet in person. We chose a burger place as our meeting spot, and unexpectedly, we ended up making out in the parking lot. There were a few red flags before that first meeting. She once posted an Instagram story where she admitted that her biggest regret was staying with her college boyfriend for 8 years, even though he couldn't satisfy her. I have to admit, during that first meeting, I pressed her about why I had the honor of spending time with her, instead of the guy she got with right after breaking up with me when we were kids. She explained that those were dark times for her, and that she had disassociated, blocking out the memory of it all. I don't think she knew, or even knows now, that he had basically destroyed his mind with drugs and was living on the streets. During the first 2 or 3 months, she was love-bombing me intensely. She was constantly around, wanting to meet every weekend. I took her to some of the best restaurants in town, places with Michelin stars, 30 to 40 miles from where we lived. That's when things started to get strange. She had an odd obsession with showing me her credit score and trying to drive my car for some reason. If I had owned something flashy, it might have made sense, but I drove a nicely equipped Prius, so it was baffling. Once, I told her a story about visiting another country with friends, where some local mob guys had mistaken us for members of organized crime from back home. When she heard this, she got excited and said something like, "See, it's better to get respect through fear." I also remember her asking where some of our mutual friends from high school had ended up. When I told her, she casually dismissed them, saying, "Oh, I knew that was going to happen to them." Ironically, a couple of months later, when she threw a birthday party, those same friends were the only ones she invited. I've always enjoyed hiking, so I invited her to join me on a trail one day. After that first trip, hiking seemed to take over her entire personality. She suddenly wanted to go hiking every single day. She even joined an all-female hiking group on Facebook, where she ended up arguing with about half of the members. Unfortunately, she managed to take the fun out of it, Most of our conversations revolved around how much she hated her absent father, who, to be fair, did sound like a terrible person, or about her mother, who had raised her alone and still let her live at home even though she was in her 30s. She often talked about feeling like an unwanted child, which struck me as unfair. Who would ever say something like that to a kid? Sometimes she even claimed that she should have grown up to be an addict, which I assumed was influenced by the shows she watched, like Euphoria. There's a mountain I used to frequent before COVID, and I invited her to hike it with me. I explained that it was the perfect afternoon hike because around 3 o'clock, the clouds would roll in and the temperature would turn pleasantly cool. She wasn't having it. Instead, she insisted we start at 9 in the morning, claiming that a trail guide from her country had recommended that time, and she had read the same thing on a hiking website. I told her I'd been climbing that mountain for years and knew the timing well, but she just looked at me and said, "Oh, you don't know anything. I'm the best hiker." Mind you, this was only 3 weeks after she had started hiking, so we went in the morning, and it was miserable. The temperature hit 90 degrees, and she could barely handle the steeper inclines without stopping frequently because of an old injury. I've climbed that mountain hungover and sleep-deprived and never taken more than 3 hours, yet this trek took 4.5 under the blazing sun. By the end, I had a sunburn on the back of my ears. When we finally made it down, I took her to eat and then to a nearby hiking supply store. And sure enough, right at 3 o'clock, the clouds rolled in, bringing cool, crisp, 70-degree air. I have a cousin I've traveled the world with who stopped speaking to me when I rekindled my interactions with her. For the longest time, I had no idea why. He had been her university professor, but I never suspected she was the reason. After we parted ways, I found out it was all due to a trivial argument they'd had, and thankfully, I was able to repair my relationship with him. Here's how things ended between her and me. She owned one of those suction cup phone holders that were popular in the late 2010s with the logo of a corn store on it. About 4 months into our renewed relationship, I had my wisdom teeth removed, and while still a bit loopy from the medication, I passed by that same corn store, sent her a photo, and joked that the person inside had told me all about Barney the purple toy. She didn't take it as a joke and replied, "Oh well, did they tell you about my big strappy one?" Then she ghosted me for about a week. After about 2 months of being ghosted, and following a story she posted about cutting someone off for doing something she didn't like, I decided to unfollow her on Instagram. I didn't want to see her posts anymore, even though she was still watching mine religiously. That's when she completely lost it. She messaged me right away on WhatsApp saying it felt like I had told her to screw off. She claimed she was utterly disgusted and furious at how I had disrespected her, then refused to speak to me again. I suspect part of her reaction came from the fact that I had dinner with a work colleague the night before, which must have made her feel like she was losing control. I haven't spoken to her since. I'm not a psychologist, but aside from the obvious issues with her father, I believe she may have other conditions and in need of both medication and talk therapy. She often seemed manic, especially on the days when she called people peasants or insisted we hike in the morning instead of the afternoon. I was devastated the first time we broke up because I was so young, but this time, I wasn't deeply affected. After all, she was the one who reached out to me. When it ended, I wasn't heartbroken, just relieved. I genuinely hope she gets the help she needs and wish her the best. Story 9. She stalked me online for 8 long years after our breakup in 2015. It all began during our senior year of high school, when she broke up with me after outing me to my entire family. She admitted she'd been cheating on me with 2 other guys for about a year, and as if that weren't enough, she added that she had never loved me. To make matters worse, she had those same 2 guys stalk me too. Things got so dark that I had to involve the police. Her threats became unbearable, pushing me to the brink. Coming home during college breaks filled me with dread, knowing she still lived in my hometown, surrounded by a little cult of boys who did whatever she told them to. I deleted every trace of myself from social media and refused to appear in photos for years, terrified she might find me again. I graduated in December 2019 and moved back home in early 2020 because of COVID-19. Unfortunately, my so-called best friend told her I was back, even revealing where I lived. I told that friend to F off and have a miserable life. For a short while after that, she stopped her stalking, and I finally started piecing my life together while the rest of the world was falling apart. But when 2021 came around, I attended a friend's wedding, and there she was. She followed me around the entire event like a shadow. I left right after the reception began because I didn't want her to ruin my friend's special day. I cried the whole way home, but I knew it was the right choice. She was so unhinged, and I couldn't risk another confrontation. The stalking continued for years, right up until last month. That's when I got a call from a friend I rarely spoke to. I answered, thinking something must be wrong, but it was her. I wanted to hang up immediately, but she kept saying she had something important to tell me, something she'd wanted to say for a long time. And then she said it. She was sorry for everything. During 2020, she caught the virus and nearly passed. She was on life support, but somehow pulled through. After that, she started trying to contact me again, saying she wanted to talk about everything. She told me that at the wedding, she hadn't expected me to be there and had followed me around because she wanted to speak with me. But given our history, I couldn't risk being alone with her. I don't forgive her. She took so much of my life away. Every time I reached out for help, no one took it seriously. I was just told to delete my accounts or block her. I did that countless times, but she always made new ones. She'd have whatever guy she was dating follow me, continuing to invade my peace. Eventually, it all became too much. I had a mental breakdown and had to be institutionalized for a month. I developed an eating disorder. I couldn't look in mirrors. My self-esteem was so low that I turned everything into my fault. I became abusive and hateful toward myself. So much so that even now, it's still hard to do anything kind for myself. So no, I didn't forgive her. I told her everything she had done, every awful thing. By the end of it, she was crying. And when I went to hang up, I told her I hoped she could move on with her life and finally leave me the hell alone so I could get on with mine. What I didn't tell her was that I'd been going to therapy, learning to forgive myself, and trying to find self-worth again. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing I was healing. I wanted her to feel the full weight of her choices, to understand the depth of the damage she caused and regret it. Sadly, she called again not long after. She said, "I still love you, and hearing your voice reminded me of how much I do." So, clearly, she's still unwell, still the same manipulative, unstable person she's always been. But me, I'm getting better. I'm healing. And surprisingly, I feel lighter knowing she finally felt some regret, even if it came far too late. Story 10. When I met him, I was 18 and full of hope for the future, while he was 25, confident, mature, or so he seemed. 6 months later, I became pregnant, and that was when the true nature of our relationship began to reveal itself. Only in hindsight did I realize how blinded I had been by the naive dream of building a family, failing to see how controlling he truly was until it was too late. It started with my clothing. He forbade me from wearing tank tops, heels, or V-necks. Then came the isolation. He claimed I didn't need a cell phone, social media, or a laptop. He insisted I postpone finishing school while pregnant, and later, after the baby arrived, focus solely on being a mother. Work, he said, was unnecessary, even as we struggled to make rent. Meanwhile, he manipulated my family, reaching out under false pretenses and claiming I didn't want them to contact me because of things I'd told him in confidence. By the time I realized what was happening, I had been cut off from everyone who cared about me. In the end, there was no one left but him and our child. His behavior soon grew more alarming. He began messaging his ex. I once caught him with powder, and arguments became a daily occurrence. Despite my protests, he continued isolating me, leaving me, with a baby in tow, completely dependent on him. By the time our child turned 1, I expressed a desire to resume my education through online classes. I suspect, though I can't prove it, that he deliberately made sure I became pregnant again to keep control over my life. When I was 7 months into my second pregnancy, the police showed up one morning and arrested him for sleeping with a girl. While he was in jail, I managed to reconnect with my family using his computer, which needed a full reset. During that process, I found incriminating messages on his MySpace account detailing his encounters with the girl. Even from jail, he continued trying to control me, sending letters filled with criticism about my choices and actions, and using friends and relatives to keep tabs on me. After a year and a half, he was released when the girl refused to testify and the case was dismissed. He didn't reach out. 5 years later, I was married and had a newborn of my own. His mother briefly attempted to contact me with a friend request on Facebook, but she deleted it soon after. A few months later, I was served with court papers. He had falsely claimed that I'd been hiding from him, a claim easily disproven since my address was publicly available. In the end, he was granted supervised visitation. At his first visitation, his intoxication became obvious, and he was removed before the session was even halfway over. No further visits were ever arranged. About a year later, I received news that he passed away on Father's Day, leaving a note seemingly designed to ensure my children would remember him each year. Later, I learned that his end came as he faced imminent incarceration, and that he left behind several young children, some only 7 years old. After his death, we completed an uncontested step-parent adoption. My children are now in high school, and while conversations about their biological father remain difficult, I have always been honest with them about the circumstances. His family tried reaching out for contact, but my children maintain strong, loving bonds with my husband and his family, and they have chosen not to engage with their biological father's relatives. It has been a long time since any contact, and life has finally settled into a calm, steady rhythm. Peaceful and whole. Story 11. We had dated on and off for a couple of years. He'd met my family, but because of other issues, my sister, 4 of our cousins, and I had stopped speaking to everyone on my mother's side of the family. Recently, though, my granddad passed away from bowel cancer, and his death brought us all closer again. Naturally, we began talking more, mostly about what to get my granddad, how my nan was coping, and later, arrangements for the funeral. I had never mentioned that he and I had broken up, or that since then, I'd realized I was a lesbian and was now engaged. Only my cousins, my sister, and my father's side of the family knew. I'd planned to tell the rest after the funeral, thinking it wasn't the right time to bring it up while everyone was grieving. On the day of the funeral, my cousins and I entered first, followed by our parents and then everyone else. My fiancée came in with the rest since we'd agreed to tell everyone we were just friends for the time being. The person sitting beside her seemed friendly, and though he looked familiar, I assumed he was my cousin's boyfriend. None of us had met him before, and they seemed about the same age. After the ceremony, he approached me and said, "Did you miss me?" before trying to kiss me. "What the heck?" my fiancé shouted, running over to me. "Sorry, I don't know you," I said, trying to walk past. "It's me, Frank," he replied, using a fake name. I froze. Holy crap. This was a manipulative coward who had tried to assault me more than once. He had hit me twice, and because I thought I loved him, I stayed. But I was being controlled, not loved, and after we broke up, I realized I didn't even like men. "Why are you at my granddad's funeral?" I demanded. I saw my mom walking toward us. "Oh, look at the happy couple," she said cheerfully. "Mom, did you invite him? We broke up years ago. He's the reason I realized I was a lesbian, for goodness sake. That's my fiancé right there," I said, pointing at Lauren. "Honey, don't lie about that," my mom replied. "He told me you two were still together." I stared at her in disbelief. "Who do you think I am, Mother? Why would I lie about my identity? That man ruined my peace of mind." People began turning to look at us. My cousins, who had also stopped talking to my mom's side of the family, and my sister came over to stand beside me. My nan approached, wanting to know what was happening, and one of my cousins quickly explained. Without hesitation, she backed me up. She told my mom that what she was saying was not only rude, but could also be seen as homophobic, especially since she didn't even know the full story. She said it was completely out of line to invite someone I had clearly cut ties with to such an important family event. Then, my nan pulled me into a hug and whispered in my ear, "You can go if you want. Granddad would be so proud of you right now. To be honest, he'd have loved seeing you stand up to your mom like that. He always admired anyone brave enough to make a scene when it mattered." Those words were probably the most comforting and empowering I had ever heard in my life. So, we left. Me, Millie, my sister, Keegan, Cameron, Joel, Maddie, and Jake, all cousins who, like me, no longer got along with my mom. Looking back now, I can still picture my granddad sitting there, quietly watching that moment unfold, a small, proud smile on his face. I know he would have been proud, not just that I stood up for myself, but that I finally found the strength and courage he had always hoped I would embrace. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.